All right, welcome to Module 16. We're going to finish up special topics today. And yeah, that's about it. Okay. Oh, there we go. So special topics 2, Module 16. As a reminder, your analysis paper is due 12/1 by 11:59 p.m. Okay. So we went over film as a political medium via documentary last module. Now we are going to cover how film acts as a political medium via narrative. And obviously, films can have a political message through any use of the film theories, but we're going to focus on satire. We're going to go sort of the next step with socio-political satire and talk about comedic satire, carnivalesque, direct, metaphor, and awareness. Okay, so satire. Satire is the use of humor, irony, exaggeration, or ridicule to expose or criticize a socio-political topic. With socio-political satire, the film will offer meaningful political critiques or commentary. Again, it's the idea that if a film can approach a very serious socio-political topic and sort of deconstruct it on a comedic level and allow an audience member to laugh at this topic in a way. The idea is that once someone can not ridicule, that's maybe the wrong word, but that somebody can find sort of mockery and it's just something existing, they'll automatically start questioning it, right? So by making the political subject humorous, audiences are able to engage with the political subject. They can examine and question the topic and kind of understand, like, why is this funny? Why is this thing sort of being attacked in this way? Important social political issues are humorously boiled down in a simple, approachable manner, bridging divide between philosophy and general public. Okay, so for satire, it works in a couple of ways, but usually it acts as metaphor. So there's usually sort of like a stand-in in the film that's symbolic of the topic. So the political content being satirized is often provided through a metaphor in the film. We're going to watch a clip from District 9, and you'll see that the aliens in that film are clearly metaphors for something else. But it doesn't always have to be comedic. Not that District 9 is comedic, so I don't know what I'm trying to say there. But it doesn't always have to be comedic when it comes to satire. I guess maybe that's what I'm talking about. For example, The Purge and George A. Romero's work, who I mentioned last module, both of those, let me just focus on The Purge. The Purge is a horror movie. It's like a horror franchise. And if anyone has seen those films, it sort of uses the purge as a metaphor to deconstruct class issues in America, right? And class division in America. So you can see how that sort of horror setup allows us to start thinking a little bit more consciously about how classism exists in America. And again, I do these all out of order, so I don't know if you watched Lehane by now. Yeah, you should have. But you can kind of see, again, just the idea of how, in that film, it's very direct, right? It is, which I have my example under here with Network, but that film is directly talking about, oppression, class division, how there are powers that be that kind of keep people in certain classes and isolate resources to certain classes. But at the same time, films can also become genre pieces that again play in these sort of social political topics, like The Purge. And then Network, I use this as an example. I just use Lehane as an example too, but something that can be sort of direct and offer kind of direct commentary on a social political topic. So something might be exaggerated, but usually just for sort of dramatic purposes. And it's maybe not necessarily humorous. And again, kind of like Lehane, which is offering a comment and a critique. Okay, so satire. Satire is a zone for critique, but a zone separated from social reality. It allows a relatively open space for critique and reflection. Excuse me, I had a bit of a cough there. We can remove ourselves from the issue, ingest commentary on it in an apolitical context, usually through humor or an entertaining metaphor, and then interpret that commentary for ourselves. So again, the idea of satire is usually when it comes to film or entertainment, people often, don't really want to be maybe confronted with contemporary issues or social political issues, things that are, very serious and things that need to be addressed. But if you can serve it through some sort of metaphor, either comedic or not, it allows the audience member to kind of still take in this topic and start deconstructing, start questioning it. Again, it's the idea that the film itself is not only approaching the topic, but offering some sort of critique or a comment. We have several forms of satire. One of them, and I mentioned this before, but I don't think I actually had a definition, is carnivalesque. Carnivalesque is a form of satire. So again, it's essentially just like a more over the top and ridiculous approach, but drawing a social political subject into a zone of crude contact where one can doubt it, take it apart, dismember it, and examine it freely. It's a ridicule of social norms is enacted by humor as a necessary device, warding off the entrenchment of any norm into becoming wholly acceptable and beyond rebuke. That's a pretty, it's a lot in that sentence. But again, it's the idea, I think the focus here is drawing a social political subject into a zone of crude contact. Again, the idea that if you can poke fun at something, it allows the audience to sort of re-examine the topic. We saw this with the Team America example when I first introduced satire, right? To sort of allow American audiences to think about collateral damage and American military might, serious topics. But we saw it through a very sort of ridiculous and over the top depiction with puppets, right? Blowing up monuments and landmarks. Okay. So satire note for class. We're going to do a little satire activity, and we're kind of going to repeat the process with parody. And just to be clear, again, this is different because we're not having like a live conversation. But when you're, again, hopefully reflecting on what the message is, right? What is the critique? I'm not asking you to agree with the message, right? So you may not always agree with the message, but what I would like you to do is when you watch the clip, recognize the moments of satire, what type of satire it is, and then start linking the satire to the social political topic / subject, right? What topic is it approaching? And then finally reach the conclusion, interpret what the criticism is. Reflect on the commentary the filmmaker provides through their use of satire. Okay, so in the next video, there are 5 examples of satire, and then also I end it with a bit of commentary on satire by Spike Lee, who I think kind of sums it up pretty nicely. But we're going to see an example of comedic satire, carnivalesque satire, direct commentary. So again, this is like sort of Lahane, right, that I was kind of mentioning before. But in this case, it's going to be a scene from Traffic. But pay attention to just like the dialogue in that scene and what they're speaking to thematically and the topic they're talking about. Then we're going to watch a piece of satire that is depicted through a metaphor. And then lastly, I'm just going to show you the trailer for Chiraq before we see the clip from Spike Lee. And this is more so just the idea of like making a narrative film to bring awareness to something that is of urgency and that, again, just kind of wants to be explored. Okay, so we talked about satire breakdown. What's the type of satire? How's it being used? What topic is it talking about? And then what is the critique? Okay, so let's go and share.
Mandrake.
Yes, Dad?
Have you ever seen a commie drink a glass of water?
Well, yeah, I can't say I have, Jack.
Vodka. That's what they drink, isn't it? Never water?
Well, I believe that's what they drink, Jack, yes.
On no account will a commie ever drink water, and not without good reason. Have you ever heard of a thing called fluoridation? Fluoridation of water?
Yes, I have heard of that, Jack, yes. Yes.
Well, do you know what it is?
No, I don't know what it is now.
Do you realize that fluoridation is the most monstrously conceived and dangerous communist plot we have ever had to face?
I don't need my father. I am strong.
Ja.
거짓말 하잖아요. 노래 좋아하는 거 뻔한데.
그렇지.
Oh, excuse me.
Did you just shark?
No, I did. It was that camera guy. It wasn't me.
뭐야?
Ladies and gentlemen, Kim Jong-un has just pooed in his pants.
우리랑 다 똑같지 않습니까?
React.
우리처럼 똥도 싸게 조심.
I thought you were my friend, Dave.
I thought you were my friend, Kim. I thought everyone lied about you. And then I saw that fake grapefruit in that fake grocery store, and I realized that you were a fake friend. And then you said you were gonna blow everybody up just to show what a big guy you are? No friend would blow up another friend's country. You're just a flawed man with a big old butthole. And you pee and poo like the rest of us. Tell me this, Dave. Will you be so cocky when I slay you in front of the whole world, you Yankee motherfucker?
Expect me to be grateful for spending the rest of my life looking over my shoulder?
Wow, that's heavy, Eddie.
Can't you for 1 second imagine that none of this had happened and my drugs had gone through? What would be the harm? Huh? What would be the harm? A few people get high who are getting high anyway. Your partner's still alive. We don't have to have breakfast together. Don't you see this means nothing? Your whole life is pointless.
You're really breaking my heart, man.
The worst part about you, Monty.
Monty?
The worst part about you, Monty, is you realize the futility of what you're doing and you do it anyway. Wish you could see how transparent you are. This food tastes like shit.
So take your stank ass and go get a shower already.
Let me tell you something. You only got to me because you were tipped off by the Juarez cartel who's trying to break into Tijuana. You are helping them. Uh-huh. So remember, you work for a drug dealer too, Monty. Fuck me.
Who is it?
Come! Get down! Hansi! Had enough of you stupid thing! Yes.
We're from MNU. We require your scroll on this eviction notification.
Yes, it's eviction notice. Put your scroll on the bottom there. You see, there's your name at the top. Christopher Johnson. There's, you're going to put your name at the bottom. You're going to another place, a nice new city built especially for prawns.
Special place.
And we're not even going to charge you, okay? Sign the fucking paper.
You don't have a choice in the matter. You just have to sign this document. That's all.
This guy's obviously he's a little sharper, you know. So we're gonna have to try something. All right, hello. Okay. Seems like we didn't understand each other there properly, eh? Okay. So you've got a little one there, eh? Do you have a license for that little one? Well, you see this litter out here. This is dangerous conditions for your child. Article 75 says that because your child is living in dangerous conditions, I'm going to take him down to child services. I'm going to go and have a little chat with your little son. Don't point your fucking tentacles at me. You said you want to stay. Your boy is coming down with me to child services.
This is an emergency. This is an emergency.
Homicides in Chicago, Illinois have surpassed the death toll of American Special Forces in Iraq. Welcome to Chirac.
Chirac, where we at?
Land of pain, misery, and strife.
Everybody here got a man banging and slanging, fighting for the flag, risking that long zip of the cadaver bag. All to the bang bang. Bang bang.
Now, some people are getting it twisted and thinking this is a comedy. Chirac is not a comedy. Chirac is a satire. And there's a difference between humor and comedy. In no way, shape, or form are we not respectful of the situation that is happening in Chirac.
People change when they decide to change.
You make it sound so easy.
All you can do is create an environment for change. Like an alcoholic, you take away his booze.
If you hide it, you can't fix it. And it's something that really needs to be fixed because it has over the last years or decades moved outside of the gang.
I truly believe Chirac is what art is all about. It creates conversation, it makes people think, it's getting people talking, it's making people pay attention to something that most people overlooked, and that's what we're doing.
In the recent years, when a film dealt with African Americans, they've always been in the past. And Kevin and I wanted to make a film that dealt with what it means to be an African American today.
So babies get wet.
Side is Chirac.
All right, so let's talk about some of these. Let's start with the comedic example from Dr. Strangelove. So what topic do you think they were addressing here? And again, just for some context, this film was made, I don't have the exact date, but it was made in the 60s, and obviously sort of responding to the Cold War. So what do you think Stanley Kubrick is getting at in this scene? Give you a second to reflect on that. Okay, so my interpretation would be that he's kind of pointing fun at conspiracy theories, right? This idea of these kind of, you know, and again, I don't know, I put my camera on so you can see my air quotes when I do it. But this idea of the sort of great communist threat that was entrenching upon America at the time, right? This idea that was very widespread at the time. And Sterling Hayden's character, pretty sure that's the actor's name, on the right there, is talking about how the conspiracy is related to fluoride, and that fluoride is like the great communist plot. So I think he's just pointing a little fun at maybe the mindset that America was kind of feeling at the time. And again, you know, sort of like what Spike Lee was saying towards the end of the video. Obviously, there were definitely pressures at the time, and I'm sure it was difficult for a lot of people. But at the same time, there was also a lot of rhetoric that was maybe communicating false information. I think that's maybe just what he's kind of pointing fun at here. Okay, now what about our next satire example? So this is Carnivalesque. And hopefully you kind of notice the difference between like this and the previous example, right? This is much cruder and kind of gross. Again, kind of pulling in the socio-political topic into a crude context. This is, I think, a pretty good example of that. Excuse me. But what do you think the filmmakers are getting at here? Okay, give you a second. All right. So hopefully you have a take. I'm going to offer my interpretation. I think the filmmakers here are trying to, and again, always think about who the audience is as well, right? Obviously, this is an American film, and obviously it's produced for an American market. That being said, you know, films are seen all over the world. Now, who knows if this will ever be seen in North Korea? That being said, you know, if it does, right, maybe the film attempting to approach someone like Kim Jong-un in this way, as someone who's sort of seen as, again, in North Korea, as this kind of like great figure, right? By kind of really, I'm trying to be careful with some of my phrasing, but the film is mocking him, right? I mean, very clearly it's mocking him. And obviously, you know, again, I'm not going to go into a whole bunch of history here, but he's responsible for some truly terrible actions and oppression in North Korea. And you see it in the film, right? The film is mocking him, making him cry, defecate himself. And when we cut away to people watching the broadcast, some of it are soldiers, right? North Korean soldiers. And you have this line that I'm not going to read out loud, but you could read it on the subtitles. Even how ridiculous that line of dialogue is, it speaks to what the film's trying to do, right? Trying to demonstrate the faults of this person, right? Instead of having people perceive him in North Korea the way he wants to be perceived, right? Again, as a god or something of a great reverence, of boiling him down and showing his faults and making them think that, you know, he poops too, which again is ridiculous, but is offering the comment that this guy's also responsible for a lot of bad things, and to sort of deconstruct that. So again, right, that's specific, but a broad sort of description too would just be to, what's the word I'm looking for? You know, reduce a political figure, right? An idea of just offering some sort of critique. All right, what about our next one here? So this is very direct, right? This is not comedic, but we have two characters in the scene that converse. I don't remember the characters' names, but we have Miguel Ferrer and we have Don Cheadle. And Miguel Ferrer has a monologue that kind of speaks to the war on drugs. And at the time, this movie was 2000, so obviously it's a little bit different now, but I think it's still offering some commentary. So how does some of that dialogue act as thematic exposition that's very specifically speaks to the war on drugs? Again, I'll maybe play a little bit of it again.
See, this means nothing. Your whole life is pointless. We don't have to have breakfast together. Don't you see this means nothing? Your whole life is pointless.
You're really breaking my heart, man.
The worst part about you, Monty.
Monty?
The worst part about you, Monty, is you realize the futility of what you're doing and you do it anyway. Wish you could see how transparent you are. This food tastes like shit.
So take your stank ass and go get a shower already.
Let me tell you something. You only got to me because you were tipped off by the Juarez cartel who's trying to break into Tijuana. You are helping them. So remember, you work for a drug dealer too, Monty.
Okay. So, and again, it's also within the plot of the film, right? So a bit of plot acting as metaphor. But we have symbolic characters. Don Cheadle represents the DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency, the arm of justice fighting this war on drugs. And then Miguel Ferrer kind of represents the other side of the conflict. He is, again, Don Cheadle, and we have Miguel Ferrer. He sort of represents the drug trade, right? And specifically the middleman between, say, like cartels and distributing drugs in America. But what is he talking about here? What is his monologue linking to? Okay, so he offers some lines like, you don't understand the futility of what you're doing. So maybe a little bit of a critique on the policy of the war on drugs and how we were approaching it. Not that we've really changed it, but how we were approaching it back then. And then also that the Drug Enforcement Agency got tipped off by another cartel to make the arrest. And he kind of has a really strong line towards the end saying, don't forget, Monty, you work for the cartel too. So just kind of this idea that, you know, that's what I'm looking for. I guess the cycle of action needs to be changed, right? The cycle of how America tries to contribute to this effort needs to change. And you probably saw that too in Sicario when you did that exercise. But pretty similar. That movie has a lot of dialogue too. That's pretty, it's implicit, right? Because it's thematic exposition, but it's speaking directly to the themes of the movie and where it's kind of coming at to its topic. Okay. Now, what about District 9? So this is metaphor. Aliens, just a bit of context for the film. An alien spaceship just appears one day in, I think, Johannesburg, South Africa. And eventually the aliens and like the humans make some sort of agreement, and the aliens can't get out. They can't go back home. And so now the humans don't really know what to do, and they don't want to put a lot of effort into it. And they build this sort of area for the aliens to stay in. What do you think the film's talking about, specifically in this scene? I think it's pretty clear. Is this just a fun alien movie, or is it trying to kind of talk about something? Okay, so my interpretation, again, hopefully you're doing this, my interpretation would be this film is using the metaphor, science fiction metaphor of aliens for immigration, right? Immigration policies. And specifically, the often unethical treatment of illegal immigrants, right? People that immigrate to countries, and how we have the government, right, represented by Sharlto Copley's character coming in trying to evict this alien from his home and forcing him to sign a paper that he was thinking that like he couldn't even understand. And the guy's reading the paper, well, the alien is reading the paper and noticing all the sort of intricacies of it and all the loopholes that they're kind of throwing in there. And when he refuses to leave, government representative is threatening with force, right? You can see it in the frame right here, but also that he'll deport the alien's child, okay? So again, I think a pretty clear critique on immigration policies. All right. Our awareness example is pretty clear, right? The trailer is trying to bring to light violence that's occurring in Chicago. And again, I think the trailer kind of focuses on gang-related violence, but obviously, as we kind of have the quote from Angela Bassett, whoops, I paused on Angela Bassett and I accidentally skipped over it. As she mentions, obviously the violence is more complicated than that, and it's not just gang violence. As we cut to a shot of, probably gonna miss it here, but shot of police officers, obviously it's more complicated than just gang violence. So again, bringing awareness to it, pretty clear. But again, I think the big takeaway is that line from Spike Lee, that there's a difference between satire and comedy. Again, satire is just sort of taking the social political topic and placing it into a different context for audiences to engage with it. It can be comedic, right? It can be over the top ridiculous, carnivalesque. It can also be direct, right? Just with dialogue that's literally talking about the topic. It can be used through a metaphor, in this case, a science fiction related metaphor. And this sort of links to direct, but just bringing awareness to something as well. Okay, so that's that. Let's keep going. All right, now to make clear the difference between parody and satire. A lot of times people use these terms interchangeably, and they're actually different. Sometimes they overlap, but satire is critiquing a topic, right? It's offering commentary and a critique. Parody is replicating something. So satire draws on social conventions. Parody draws on aesthetic ones. Excuse me. Parody attacks a particular text or genre, making fun of how that text or genre operates. Parody is a comical recreation of something else. In our case, it's a comical recreation of the form/medium. So we're going to see a couple of examples here. And the first form is pastiche, which is just comical recreation, right? There's no real critique there. Maybe there's a little bit of like the ridiculousness of major action movies that were coming out, but you'll see a parody, right? A recreation of a fake movie trailer, right? And again, the purpose that it's serving is just comical recreation. I don't know if there's a great satirical comment there, but you'll notice it's, again, the recreation of the thing, of the medium, in this case, a movie trailer. Then you'll see another parody example that is recreating something we saw last module. And notice how it's using all the formal elements of a propaganda film. You are going to see shots that sort of mimic specific shots from Triumph of the Will, and then also just the what's what I'm looking for? Construction of Why We Fight. You'll notice the narration, the use of titles. So yes, so that is a recreation of a propaganda film that you're going to see. And again, it's a parody. It's a comical recreation. It's pretty over the top. It's dealing with, giant bugs. But there is a satirical comment by just seeing a comic recreation of a propaganda piece. Then the last thing you're going to see in the video that I'm going to show you in just a minute is a mockumentary example. And mockumentary, again, can be several things. You can make a mockumentary that is also satirical, right? That's offering a critique. But what a mockumentary is just a comical recreation of a documentary. So you'll see how the filmmaker is recreating the formal elements of a documentary. A-roll, using interviews, right? Interviewing subjects, and then cutting to B-roll, supplemental footage, and then cutting back to A-roll with interviews. Okay. So, I guess I answered some of these. I forgot I had this slide on here. So for the first video, it's going to be a scene from the movie Last Action Hero. I said it, but maybe you didn't catch it. For that parody example, what type of media is being comically recreated? Is it offering any social critique or commentary, or is it purely a form of pastiche? I have a hard time with that word, which is just a comical recreation. Is there a bit of a genre deconstruction on a meta level? Then we're going to see Starship Troopers, a clip from that, which is going to be a piece of parody that offers a satirical critique. So what type of media is being recreated? Again, I already answered on the last slide, but is it offering any social critique or commentary, or is it just pastiche? Okay, then mockumentary, what type of media is it recreating? We already know it's a documentary. All right, but let's watch it and we'll talk a little bit about them. Okay. So here's our, let's see if I could say it, pastiche, right? Pastiche. And again, I spoiled it before, but we are comedically recreating a movie trailer. And again, pastiche just means comic recreation, right? It's just funny. And I think that's part of it, right? I mean, this is just kind of goofy and funny, but maybe there's a little bit of a comment there, a comment on, this movie was made in like the late 90s. So we were sort of at the peak of these big action movies with Arnold, Stallone, Van Damme. That's all I got for right now. So I think it is maybe offering a little bit of a comment on just maybe how ridiculous the genre is getting. But again, that's a reach. But hey, I think maybe it's a bit of a comment. But for the most part, I think it's just kind of a comedic recreation. But let's look at the Starship Troopers example. So this is a recreation of propaganda, right? We saw, and again, I'm pausing on this shot right now, but this shot is almost exactly recreating that shot from Triumph of the Will, the shot that I talked about last module, right? That high angle shot of all of the Nazi Party followers and soldiers. And we're seeing the same thing as Starship Troopers here. And I didn't really set up Starship Troopers, and I'm not going to talk about it for too long, but the plot of that movie is it kind of starts off with, we have like Space Marines from Earth fighting these giant bug aliens. And at first you think the giant bugs are planning on like invading Earth, and it's kind of like over the top. But then as the film continues, you find out that actually it was the American forces that went to the bugs planet to I forget why they went, but we went there to find like resources, and then we found something, and then we started the conflict with the bugs, and then it just continued to escalate. And the movie plays around with that and plays around with the sort of filtration of ideas, not ideas, of information, and what the public receives and what they don't. So with that in mind, you can probably see how by placing this, comedic recreation of a propaganda film is sort of reinforcing that. And a lot of times what the film will do is you'll see these propaganda pieces and then immediately cut to the middle of like a battle between the Space Marines and these giant bug aliens. And it's incredibly gruesome. Paul Verhoeven, the director, doesn't hold back on any of that. Even though it is sort of, again, over the top and playing in genre, that almost on paper sounds like something from, almost like a cartoon or something. But when you actually see the reality of it, you see people screaming in pain and, dismembered limbs, characters that you've followed from the start of the film until that battle sequence, and now they're dying in painful deaths. So again, think about that. Think about the changing between these propaganda pieces to the actual battle footage. So you can probably see how he's offering a comment on how maybe the media presents conflict and war to masses and tries to recontextualize it for the public. And again, this is pretty over the top. I always laugh at that shot of them passing out bullets. It just doesn't make any sense, but again, okay. And then we saw the mockumentary. I don't know if I have much to say about this, but hopefully you notice we have B-roll. Then we have, it's coming pretty soon, B-roll, wait for it, A-roll, right? Our interview. And again, this is all fake. It's a movie. You have, I don't know who he is, but that's Parker Posey, who's a great actor. So you have two actors playing the scene. And it's just, again, the approach is using the formal properties of a documentary, A roll and B roll, and just playing around with it. It's a comedic recreation of that form. Okay, so I think that's enough of that. Let's go there. All right. Excuse me. So hopefully the parody example makes sense. We already talked about it. Okay, I'm going to talk about historical dramas briefly. Okay, so I don't have a video for these, but we'll just kind of talk about it quickly. But historical dramas are just narrative films that, you know, are based on true stories. And that, again, that's usually how they're marketed. But it's the idea that a film will shed light on a political movement and or major impacts on society. And some of these films, you know, I've mentioned this movie before, but Detroit and many other films will kind of revisit history and kind of put it on trial and investigate and call out things that, you know, people should be held responsible for, or at least remind audiences of, you know, unjust acts that were, what's the word I'm looking for? That were done in our past, in our history, in American history, or maybe investigating somewhere else. Again, I phrased that weird. Okay, but could also be forms of propaganda. So again, it can be good. Again, like Detroit, investigating things that we should know more about. Same thing with the genre deconstruction video I showed you with Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, right? It can be good. It can investigate things and, again, shed light on injustices, but it can also be forms of propaganda. It can edit history in order to make subject appear in a better light. And we see this sometimes in like biopics, which are just like biographical dramas. Revisionist history just means a reinterpretation of the historical record. So again, just kind of keep in mind, if a movie says it's based on a true story, often filmmakers take certain liberties with that. So if you watch a movie and it's based on a true story and, you know, it clicks, I suggest also doing maybe some more research outside of it too. Okay. Now let's talk about animation. Okay, animation. To be clear, animation is a storytelling medium, not a genre. You can make an animated film in any genre. Animated movies are just as diverse in genre as in live action. I think we often connect animation to like family comedies because of stuff like Pixar, but there are you know, hundreds of different animated films that take place in different genres and operate as different genre pieces. I'm going to show you a frame from a film called Renaissance, I believe. Renaissance, that's like a mystery, and it's like an R-rated mystery, but it's animated, right? It's a way of telling a story. So that's all I got there. It uses the basic filmic properties as live action. In film, again, we have 24 still frames for every second of video or a film. For animation, if it's hand-drawn, you have 24 drawn frames for 1 second of animation. I'm going to show you a picture of this, but the basically what you draw in, and again, I'm talking about 2D animation, are called cells. And then when you draw within those cells are then photographed and then played back at 24 frames per second to make it look like motion. And often animators play around with that. If you look at like older types of animation, especially cheaper types of animation, some animators don't do 24 frames and they'll do, I don't know if they ever goes like far as like half, but like for example, like 12 frames of drawn animation, and you'll notice the animation just isn't as smooth. And sometimes like if you're animating a character and they're supposed to be sort of reacting with facial expressions, it sort of jumps to different facial expressions. That's because you're drawing less frames, right, within your 1 second of animation. So this is the shot I was talking about. This is from the animated film Renaissance. And again, think about how this is using the formal elements of film. Animation is referencing all the formal elements of film, but now just, again, in an animated medium. So we can see when they drew this, now obviously this looks to be maybe a combination of hand-drawn and animated, computer generated animation, but you could tell they're referencing the formal elements of film, right? We can say, what is the setup, right? Let's talk about the setup, then let's talk about lighting, let's talk about composition. You could do all 5 elements of cinematography in this one shot. So what is the setup? Setup is a wide shot, low angle, frontal to 3/4 frontal position. What's the lighting? Talk about the lighting. Dealing with low key lighting. I'll use my little annotate tool. We have deep shadows towards the top of the frame. Shadows also hit some of our characters. And again, this is all just animated. So there's sort of painting off reference of what we would see via cinematography. So this is our reference light, right? Our natural source in the scene that's being greatly exaggerated to shade in shadows on characters, where we see highlights on characters, where we see highlights on the set, which again is all drawn, but the actual location and environment. So we see that them referencing all the elements of cinematography. Same thing with composition. Use your rule of thirds grid. Notice how they're spacing out there 1, 2, 3, 4 subjects. Notice blocking, frontal, 3/4 frontal, profile, and how the blocking also acts with the lighting. The way we see these characters, we can see, this subject sort of has side lighting going on. One side of her face being highlights, the other shadow with just one spot of highlight on her eye there. For this subject, most of his face is shadow with just a bit of highlights that reveal anything but his eyes. What else do we want? Depth of field, deep depth of field, foreground and background are all in focus, right? So again, it's referencing all the same formal properties. And if we watched, a second of this, you'd also hear sound design. And you'll see editing. Again, it's all the same properties, but now we're just animating these elements. This is an animation cell. So as you can see, this is obviously like an early stage, but you can see literally the individual frames per cell that will then be further animated and then photographed. Okay, so our main types of animation, you have hand-drawn or cell animation. This is when animators hand draw subjects in a cell. Then after they draw them, they are then photographed. There are 24 separate cells, for 1 second of 2D animation. Then you have stop motion. Stop motion is basically like a tangible form. And it's a recreation of the scene using usually like puppets. And the only difference now is you're not, animating anything. Again, you're manipulating like puppets, or claymation, so like clay figures, anything that's tangible, and you're moving it sort of one movement at a time and then photographing it with a camera. And again, now you're just taking essentially a video, but they are still pictures, so they can animate the figures carefully. And the camera records the movement of the object. Camera takes a picture for every movement of object, 24 stills for 1 second of animation. Then you have computer animation, which is just the use of computer modeling software to generate animation, where you can construct virtual characters, objects, and backgrounds in all 3 dimensions. Okay, so I'm going to show you the video here, and it's going to demonstrate the differences between these animation types much better. But when I made this video, to be clear, I didn't make it, but when I edited this video, I made sure to sort of structure it for each animation type. So just to kind of give you a preview really quickly, the first thing you're going to see is how hand-drawn animation is done. You're going to see kind of behind the scenes. Then you'll see about 30 seconds of hand-drawn animation. Then it's going to cut to stop motion, and it's going to do the same thing. You're going to see the behind the scenes, how animators create stop motion, Then you're going to see stop motion in action, the actual finished product. Then we're going to do the same thing for computer animation. For computer animation, just be on the lookout for a couple of things. You'll notice previs, which is just like early storyboards, which I'll talk about next module, of animated sequences before all the animation is completed. And what else do I want to say? You'll also see a little bit of sound design for computer animation. You'll notice, if you're going to use a sound effect, you have to go to a Foley artist and get that sound effect to drop into the soundtrack for the film. For stop motion, you'll see an example of a voice actor doing a scene, and how it sort of is very similar to ADR, where the actor is in a recording booth, they have the script in front of them, there's usually a director there as well who's kind of giving them directions, and they're performing their character on mic, which will then just be dropped into the soundtrack. Okay, so here we go. All right. So, I don't know if there's much to talk about. Pretty self-explanatory. So I'm just going to go ahead and go back to the PowerPoint. All right. Okay. I don't know if you can tell, but I took a little break and I have a cough drop in my mouth, so I apologize if it's making noise. Okay. So we went over animation. You saw the examples of each one. Hopefully that made sense. Again, pretty self-explanatory. And again, this is not a deep analysis of animation, but I just kind of want to introduce the different types and give you a little bit of a, I guess, appreciation for how it's done. Okay, so claymation is really just a form of stop motion. Everything you're seeing in the frame is tangible. It's being photographed with a camera. Again, like you saw in the Paranorman behind the scenes, right? They were using DSLRs to just literally take pictures of the figures as they were being moved one part at a time. So that's what we're seeing here. The only difference is that the character, and I don't know if the props are, I can't really tell, but the character definitely is made from clay, right? It's this claymation. Okay. And then I talked about motion capture before. This was, again, it's weird for me because I'm doing these all together and I don't really remember when we talked about this. Maybe with post-production, I mentioned it. But this is motion capture specifically for computer animation. So what we're going to see in the next shot is the finished form, like the actual animation. Right now, what you're seeing are your actors on set performing the scene. And they all have those motion capture like dots on, let me use my annotate tool. Right, so here we have Ray Winstone, Anthony Hopkins, John Malkovich. So these really like classically trained, great actors wearing suits like this to perform a scene. And they're wearing the suits so animators can track their movements. And you can see on the suits, there's all these little tracking dots. And if you see their face, it's kind of hard to see because I know the resolution is not great. But on their face, there's additional sort of motion capture dots that's being recorded. And now also, this is an older version. Nowadays, they actually also have like cameras that are built in front of the actors' faces so they can capture their emotion with their facial expression. So it's even a little more elaborate now. But this is also same idea being used. So we track all of their facial expressions, their movements, and then you give that over to the animators and they use it as reference. And now we have computer animation. So your actors actually perform the scene from beginning to end on set with these motion capture sensors. Then you hand that information over to the animators and they animate you a scene. Okay, then we have this idea of sort of the same practice, but with like a hybrid where you have live action and computer animation that also uses motion capture techniques, but we'll get to that in a second. So other types of animation, rotoscoping. Rotoscoping is actually an animation technique where you film the scene, right? Just like you would a movie, and then you actually trace over it. And it used to be done to replicate movement when you're animating. So you would project the footage that you shot onto like a piece of paper and literally trace over it a frame at a time. So you would get more naturalistic movement in your animation. So rotoscoping is trace/shading over live action footage. And it was created to reproduce. It was the idea that you take the footage and then you trace over it for your finished animation. But a lot of animators now use it on a more stylistic purpose, where you film your scene and then through a post-production process, you actually shade over it. And that's also called cell shading. That's the look, that's the style it kind of creates. And I'll show you a few pictures of these. Then you have hybrid types of animation with live action with hand drawn or live action and computer generated imagery. Live action and hand drawn animation is when you have a filmed scene and then you take that footage and actually draw within the frame. Again, you know, we don't really do this anymore because if you're ever going to have animation within the frame, it's usually computer generated. But if you kind of go back in the past when everything was shot on film, animators would literally take the frame and draw in animation. So characters and or backgrounds are drawn in the live action footage. This can range from characters to matte paintings. Then you have live action and computer generated imagery, which is the same idea as live action and computer animation, but is a type of, whoa, that's a typo. It's the same idea as live action and hand drawn animation. The only difference is that the animation is computer animation. And it's usually less stylistic, and it's often used to be representative of like something real, something actually existing in the scene. And I'll show you some examples here. But nowadays we implement CGI for characters. You see entire characters that are computer generated. And again, that's usually done through motion capture. An actor performs it. They track their movements and facial expressions. They use that information to then animate the character. You have animated backgrounds for a lot of films. Okay, I'm gonna stop rambling and just show you some things. So rotoscoping, this is back for 101 Dalmatians, and you can see they filmed the scene in a set with actors, right? Here's the actual frame, one frame of the film strip. And then they would actually project this onto like a piece of paper, and the animators will trace over it to get more lifelike movement for the animation. So you see a few more examples here. And again, we see cells. This is cell animation, one cell at a time. This is rotoscoping, specifically cell shading, so a stylized choice. So this is from the movie A Scanner Darkly. And you can see the far left frame is the footage. They actually, you know, this is a movie that stars Robert Downey Jr., Winona Ryder, Keanu Reeves, Woody Harrelson. This is Rory Corcoran. I always mispronounce his name, Rory Corcoran. But anyway, a lot of actors that are, you know, big name actors that filmed this movie together, right, in live action, just like any other movie. And then when they were done filming it, they shot digitally. They took the footage, brought it over to an animation team, and they literally just took the live action footage and through computer animation drew over it. And you can see, you know, what they're doing here by just adding an animated element over everything. Not only the actor, but also look at the location and how that also becomes animated. So that's rotoscoping, specifically cell shading. Then we have live action and hand drawn. This is Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And you can see we have our live action footage and then literally just animating in your character and this steering wheel. Okay. Then we have live action and CGI. So again, this is another motion capture example. The only difference is we're going to see how they take the reference of Andy Serkis's performance here and CG in a character. So everything is live action, right? You're on location. You can tell they're on location here, filming the scene with Andy Serkis and James Franco. They're playing throughout the entire scene. Andy Serkis has, again, the mocap dots and suit on, tracking his movement, tracking his facial expressions. They filmed the entire scene. Okay, they're done. Now they hand over that footage to the animators. Whoops. And you get something like this. So now they animate Caesar over Andy Serkis. And again, his performance is influencing everything that you're seeing. And if you've seen these movies, I'm trying to remember, the names are so confusing for those movies, but if you've seen Rise of the Planet of the Apes, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, and War of the Planet of the Apes, the like last three, they all utilize this technology And if you look at Caesar's performance in those movies, you could tell like a trained actor is influencing all of those little subtle choices. So that's all through motion capture. Okay, then we have voice actors. You saw it through the example for Paranorman, so I don't know how much I need to really talk about it, but normally it depends. Sometimes the animation is sometimes it's not even animated yet, and the actors only have references, so you can even see it in this picture. Mandy Moore is doing the voice for her character in Tangled, and you can see there's like a character drawing for her character, some early sketches, and they have the script in front of them. And usually a director, if you notice, animated films often have a number of directors, but usually a director is in the recording booth with them. And I don't know why we need 1, 2, 3 microphones, but they have 4 microphones on the actor performing. There's no way all these mics are on. I'm assuming it's this mic in front of the pop filter. This is like the first time I really noticed that. Like, this doesn't make any sense. So I'm assuming they have a bunch of mics in the studio and they're just using this one. But anyway, the actor has the script in front of them. They're performing the scene. They're reading all the dialogue. They do a take just like you would in a movie. And then the director gives notes, or they say, okay, good, let's go to the next line. Again, you saw it in the example video. Anna Kendrick did a line reading, and it was like, super good, but the note was, hey, can you make it also with like a sense of fear? And then she redid the line again, right? And they just take that line and then drop it into the movie. So voice actors record their dialogue usually before the film is fully animated. And then the reason they record it before is so then the animators can animate like the lip syncing of the characters to the performance. They read the dialogue from the script while being directed. They may have pre-visualization material or early animatics. The process is very similar to ADR. Controlled ISO booths, sometimes with fellow cast members. Animation is then finished to match the performer's dialogue. So the only thing I'll say is, again, mostly it's like this, a controlled studio environment with one actor at a time. But some films do sort of like interesting approaches. I used to show the film The Fantastic Mr. Fox, because we used to do it sort of an auteur. What's what I'm looking for? Like not a module, because we do this in class, but I would do a section on an auteur, and the auteur we would do is Wes Anderson. And I used to show the film Fantastic Mr. Fox, and that was Wes Anderson's first animated film. It's in stop motion, and he has actors like George Clooney, Meryl Streep, Bill Murray record the voices for these characters. And instead of doing it in a sound booth, he actually he had them like all stay at a house, and he was there, and they would just all play out the scene with the actors in the house doing the scene, and the sound department would just have boom mics and record them performing the scene, and then they drop that into the finished film. So that's a sort of out there example, but sometimes there's different approaches to recording actors. Okay, animation audio. Sound effects, much like a live action film, sounds are created via Foley. You saw that with the Coco example when they're recording the sound of like the dogs running. Ambient presence, the only difference here is that there's no presence track recorded on set, right? There's no such thing. In a film, if you're filming a scene, I don't know, at an abandoned train station, when you're done filming, you take a reference track, right? You hold up the boom mic, take a presence track, and then you could build it up in post-production. But in animation, that has to all be designed because you didn't go out and film anything. So now that ambient track is a little bit more elaborate. And then film score, same process as live action. Okay, so there's our credits for the presentation. I don't have any more notes. Okay, so that's it for this module. There's no quiz, right? I want you to be focusing on your analysis paper. Is there anything else I need to say? I don't think so. I'll see you next module when we get into encoding, and there'll be an extra credit opportunity. All right, see you later.